Hello, dear learners. Welcome to another lesson of learning. Today we'll be seeing a very iconic and very important poem, The Chimney Sweeper by William Blake. First up, I want to talk about the social context around which this important poem was written. So, going back to the social context, this was the time period of the Industrial Revolution, and during the Industrial Revolution, we saw the advent of a lot of machinery and a lot of industries that became prolific all around England. And along with these industries, there was a need for laborers, and we see that adult community they were also engaged in labor. Along with them, we also see that a lot of child laborers were also engaged in various kind of menial jobs, and so much so that these technological advancements led or forced parents into poverty, and in such a scenario they even sold their children for food. And when these children were sold, they were sold as young as when, newborn sometimes, as young as 4 year olds, they were sold to workhouses. And over here, they were called as pauper apprentices. Reason behind them being called as pauper apprentices because they were given food and lodging, place to stay, but they were not given wages for the labor that they were doing. All the menial jobs that they did, they were not getting paid. Whereas the others who were, taking care of them or who were in charge of them were receiving all the wages. And so they were like paupers, and hence they were called pauper apprentices. And it was like a slave-like condition and a lot of abuse these children had to undergo. And sometimes they were gravely injured in their workplace, but they never received any medical treatment and they succumbed to, their injuries. And some of them were even killed on the job. There was no justice served for any of them. So there was a lot of, child labor abuses. And so, politicians took the forefront. And then we see that, child labor remained prominent in Europe for a very long period. And even in United States after the 20th century, we see that child laborers you know, were found. And unfortunately, in India, we see, child labor is still in practice. So the title and the work, the chimney sweeper. So what does chimney sweeper stand for? So it's a reference to this, the boys who used to clean the chimneys. So in England, these houses and luxurious places, they did have uh, tall chimneys, especially during winter. They used to use it for keeping the house warm, and so they had a fireplace, and all these, smoke and everything used to come out of these chimneys, and they needed someone to clean these chimneys, and so these boys were employed as climbing boys. They used to go and sweep these chimneys, and they used to, clean these chimneys. And why were boys used? Small boys used because they were small in figure, and they could get into these narrow chimneys, and they could clean them better. And they used to start off as early as 4 years old. 4 to 6 year old boys were used, and it was an apprenticeship system wherein the master sweeps they used to receive all the wages, and these children used to get food, clothing, and shelter. And usually the legal guardianship, parents signed it off, and the guardians had total control over the life of these children, and they had no way of escaping this profession until they became adults. And there was no laws also that stopped this. And we see that, after 7 years of service, usually, a boy would get advanced and he would become a journeyman sweep, and then later he would, again be promoted to a master sweep. So we see that Blake, saw this social evil that was in practice, and he spoke against it through his poem. So these are some of the representations. So you see that, the boys usually carried everything. They had, the long brushes with which they used to clean these chimneys. Then in the center you have the picture of a chimney. It's very narrow. It's very very there's not much space for these children to move around. In the picture depicted, we see that even the child is kind of stuck, and it's very cruel to say that some of these children broke their legs because when they used to, or any of their, arms or bones, when they used to get stuck inside these chimneys, they were forcefully brought out. And, when they entered these chimneys, sometimes they used to go in without any clothes on. So it was natural that they would get burnt, because of the heat that was already there in the chimneys. And some of them, had to, received a lot of scratches and bruises on their bodies. These are, some of the examples. There's also a trade card from 1789 of a chimney sweep. So with that, in the backdrop, we see that, these chimney sweeping was widely practiced. And, especially Sir Percival Pott, he spoke about the first industrial cancer. And this was, due to the health repercussions because of these children inhaling all the soot, and they were in danger. Their lives were in danger. They had eye inflammation, sometimes even blindness, led to blindness, bone deformation, lung problems because of the soot inhalation. The working condition was very bad. Like I mentioned, the chimneys were very narrow, so it was 9 by 9 inches wide only. And like I said, they had to climb through, sometimes naked, using their knees and their elbows. And coroners, when these children succumbed to, some of the injuries, they were termed as accidental deaths. So we see that, such a heinous practice was voiced against by William Blake. And he spoke against, this widely, and that's the reason he wrote these poems. So about William Blake, so he was born in London and he died also in London, born in 1757 and died in 1827. And this particular piece is written in Songs of Innocence and even Songs of Experience. Also, he has written the second part to this chimney sweeper. So, Songs of Innocence came out in 1789 and Songs of Experience in 1794. The piece that we are going to see is from Songs of Innocence. So the recurrent themes are of hardship and childhood and exploitation of children. And it's also a critique of the organized, religion, and it's how these children were exploited. Like I mentioned, these children, when they were sent to these workhouses, it was the parish that used to, send their wages. And most of their wages were withheld. They were not given, the wages. And in this poem, we do have a reference, to one of the common places. And then you also have, a hope and spiritual salvation as some of the other themes. So this is the poem for you. So it has 6 stanzas, and each stanza, talks about different aspects. So first up, it introduces the narrator. So when his, talks about his ordeal, how he came into the profession. So when his mother died, his father just, sold him. And when he was sold, all he could do was weep, weep, weep. The thought of abandonment, the emotional turmoil that this child had to undergo, and then this he had to transfer into a chimney sweeper. And he tells that he had to sleep in soot. That talks about the pathetic condition in which he lived. So that's stanza one. In stanza two, he introduces his little friend Tom Dacre. So Tom Dacre, was brought in just like him as a young boy, and he cried a lot, especially when his head was shape. So yeah, there's a reason why these children's hair was shaved off because it always used to be covered with soot, and especially when it was curly and it becomes very difficult for maintenance. So then they were tonsured, and these boys didn't have any hair, and we see that Tom Jackery laments the fact that he had to lose his hair. And we see the narrator, who's a little older than Tom. He actually pacifies him and consoles him by telling him, "Don't worry, you need not have to, your white hair will not turn black, so don't worry about, all the soot and all the dust. It's for good." And then moving on to the third stanza, he talks about how that night Tom, you know, after his episode of crime, when he goes to sleep, he saw a vision. Oh, he saw a dream, and in his dream, he saw a lot of chimney sweepers like Dick, Joe, Ned, Jack, and they were all locked up in coffins of black. So this talks about, how a lot of children, abandoned children, they were given very common names like Dick, Joe, Ned, Jack, but they never had, proper surnames. And Dacre stands for one of the, age-old houses, um, workhouses called as Dacre House. And we see that, he also sees all these young boys who are locked. It's like their fate has been sealed in coffins. But in the next following stanzas, all these are dark representations. But the following three stanzas, we see that Blake gives a note of hope in the next three stanzas, where the boy also visualizes an angel who appears, who opens the coffin and sets them all free. So this talks about a savior who is there, and after they're set free, they have hope and they have a place where it's all green and they're laughing and they're happy. So it's a total contrast to the cry and hue which was there in the first and the second stanza. So second stanza, four gives a different picture of happiness, and they wash in a river and shine in the sun, meaning they're all clean. These children could barely afford water, so they never used to be able to, take bath also. After doing a lot of labor, they were not given water to wash themselves. But here, in Tom's vision, he sees them having the luxury of cleaning themselves and shining in the sun. Then, it also talks about how, the angel gives one promise that if he's a good boy, then, although he's abandoned in the world, but he'll have an eternal father, and this father, who is God himself, will keep him always happy. And on this note, we see that in the last stanza, Tom awakens from his sleep, and he has some hope inside, and with this hope, he carries forward his normal life that he has to do, which is rising up in the dark, getting all his bags, getting his brushes, and getting ready for the day's work. And though the morning was cold, we see that Tom was happy and warm because he had been promised that if he was good, then definitely God would be his father. And so, if all do their duty, they need not fear. So, with this hope, we see that Blake ends this very important poem. So, this is an explanation of the poem, and the poetic devices. Some of the symbols used are white hair, which stands for innocence, black suit is for corruption, talks about the corrupt system. And in the imagery, we see there's a contrast between dark suit and heavenly light. And rhyme and rhythm is also present. It's simple, its lyrical style enhances the accessibility. So I hope all of you understood this poem, and this poem is a good read. And part two of this poem is also quite interesting to read, and I hope you go back and read part two to understand the overall poem. So thank you everyone for joining.